Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And it's my pleasure to take a call on this bill. It's the first call I've taken on this bill, and it's also my pleasure to be a member of a party that is going to exercise its conscience on these issues tonight. I feel sorry for many of the members opposite that clearly their rhetorical flourishes show that they feel something different than their party is whipping them into voting. So I really do feel a great deal of sadness in the House tonight as we debate this bill, knowing there are members here that are going to have to vote against their conscience, because actually the exercise of conscience is something that MPs should do more than a little bit. It is something that is crucial to our role as local representatives, and it is something that is fundamental of our justification of being in this House. As I said, that this is my first call that I've taken on this bill, and I haven't traversed many of the ground that many colleagues have on this bill that have been well rehearsed. And these are very important points about the harm that gambling, and particularly pokie machines, do in our communities. I guess I was first alerted to the kinds of social harms that pokie machines can bring about in a community when I was first elected as a community board member in Christchurch in 2004, in a reasonably large ward that was made up of one very high socio-economic area and one very low socio-economic area. The high socio-economic area had not one pokie machine in it. The low socio-economic half of my ward was rife with pokie machines. This was nothing but a hope tax in poor suburbs. These machines were nothing but machines put there to give people who had no economic hope some hope in their lives and exploit them along the way. And this is something, in talking to my constituents that I represented as a community board member, is something that I will remember for the rest of my political life when we come to consider these issues, because I think they are very important to consider these issues from a very grassroots, community up kind of basis. Now, we've heard tonight about a large number of agencies that have talked about what has happened to this bill through its passage through the House, how really it has been hijacked by the government to push through its own aims, and that it doesn't resemble the bill that first came to this House. The Salvation Army, an organisation that is absolutely committed to reducing the harm of problem gambling in our communities, has come out and criticised many of the changes, saying they do nothing for problem gamblers and those at risk or communities wishing to manage the impact of gambling. And it's this kind of efficacy, it is the ability to reduce those harms that I'm looking for in legislation that purports to be about addressing this very real danger that we have for many of our communities. I want to talk specifically about a couple of the supplementary order papers that have been brought by colleagues. One of these is Supplementary Order Paper 290 in the name of Carol Beaumont, who my colleague talked about in the previous speech, and the other is Supplementary Order Paper 292 in the name of the Honourable Trevor Mallard. Both of these supplementary order papers talk about the transfer of licences and deal with those issues. In the case of Supplementary Order Paper 290, this provides that a territorial authority's Class 4 venue policy must include a relocation policy which must specify the maximum percentage, and it goes on in quite a bit more detail. And then 292, in the name of Trevor Mallard, talks about ensuring that no Class 4 venue licence may be transferred to an area that has higher deprivation than the old venue. Now, to many members, these may seem like very strict rules put on a piece of paper and things that will never come into play. But I'd like to share with the House and enter into the record what happened with Class 4 gambling venues post-earthquakes in Christchurch. What we had is we had to, as a city, and our City Council and our community boards had to confront this very real issue, that 36 Class 4 gambling venues were destroyed in the earthquakes and were inoperable. Now, despite the fact that we had, that's 46 venues, not 36 machines, I'd like to point out. Now, despite the fact we had a reduced number of machines operated in our city, the circumstances of the earthquakes and the emotional stress that was brought about saw a spike in gambling in our city. Along with alcohol consumption, gambling also increased. rise after the earthquakes. So the City Council had to wrestle with a very real problem, and I'm proud to come from a city that decided to hold its line and keep its sinking lid.
Is the member seeking another call?
Mr Chairman.
You are?
I
call
am.
the honourable member Megan Woods.
So I am proud to come from a city that, despite these issues and a lot of pressure that was put on it post the earthquakes in Christchurch, to change its policy, because it had to come to review its gambling policy in February of 2012, earlier than the due date of the August 2012 review that was due. It had to come and review this policy and decide, and some very real decisions had to be made. We had operators who were struggling for survival, who said, we want to transfer these machines to areas that wouldn't have been damaged, that haven't been damaged by the earthquakes. They put forward the argument that I think everybody, including the councillors who heard the submissions and subsequently voted to keep the sinking lid, had a great deal of empathy for these people that were saying, if it weren't for the earthquake, we could still operate these machines, which are a part of our business. But sometimes, Mr Chairman, communities and political leaders have to take a stand. And our community leaders and local body politicians in Christchurch made a call that we were not going to rebuild a city on the back of a poverty tax in our poorest suburbs. That we were going to have political leadership in our city that said the earthquakes have given us an opportunity to clear some of our communities of some of this harm. And we took that opportunity. And I think this is actually something that Christchurch, when it looks back on the wake of the earthquakes, should be hugely proud of. And it should be something that we celebrate. And this is the kind of leadership we need. We need people that act on their conscience, that understand the harm that these machines can do in their community. They understand that it is a vexed issue, but ultimately they need to put the health and the well-being of their communities first. I urge government members to vote with their conscience tonight, to look at the harm that these machines do in their communities and to exercise their conscience in a way we as elected members are voted in by our communities to do. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
I call the honourable member Chris Hipkin.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman.